Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Caucus for Women in Statistics Lunch and Learn on navigating social media and creating a professional online presence. We have a panel of Drs. Ellie Murray, Sam Tyner, and Claire McKay Bowen here today. And my name is Jessica Lavery. I'm a biostatistician at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and I'll be moderating. And the goal of today is to discuss ways to create a professional presence online via relevant profiles and websites, and then by engaging with the statistics and epidemiology communities. So we have some slides. I have an outline, but this isn't a huge group, so I think we can be fairly informal, and the idea is to have about 35 to 40 minutes of discussion with the panelists, and then we'll have a lot of time at the end for an audience Q&A. And also just to note, I'll be taking notes as the speakers are talking, and the Caucus for Women in Statistics will circulate a list of recommendations following today's lunch and learn. So we'll go through introductions, and we'll talk about representing yourself online, and then social media platforms, and then we'll close with the Q&A at the end. So to start, Dr. Claire McKay Bowen is the lead data scientist of privacy and data security at the Urban Institute. She develops and researches algorithms that create synthetic versions of confidential data, such as income tax return data, and assesses the quality and privacy guarantee of the generated synthetic data. Next up, we have Dr. Ellie Murray, who's an assistant professor of epidemiology at the BU School of Public Health and an associate editor for social media at the American Journal of Epidemiology. Her research focuses on the application of causal inference methods for improved decision-making, particularly in the context of resource, time, or data constraints. And she is also the co-host of Casual Inference, a podcast about making decisions with data. And finally, our third panelist is Dr. Samantha Tyner, who's the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the Office of Survey Methods Research. And in this role, she creates interactive data visualization tools for BLS programs, analyzes Twitter and other text data, and examines the use of Shiny at BLS and elsewhere. And before moving to DC last year, Dr. Tyner received her PhD in statistics from Iowa State University and co-founded the Ames, Iowa chapter of R-Ladies. So we're really excited to have everyone here today to talk about creating a professional presence online and social media use as a professional. So I wanted to start talking about representing yourself online and kind of your static online presence. So thinking of a profile or a website or a digital resume, so something that you may not update or interact with on a regular basis. Kind of you update it one time and then you go in and make updates when needed. And then we'll move into the kind of more dynamic portion of online representation and interaction with social media, kind of in part two of this. So the first set of questions is for each of the panelists and whoever wants to start. And then subsequent questions will be geared towards specific panelists with opportunity for others to weigh in. So I want to talk first about why your online presence is important, and if this is something that employers are looking at, or if you hire others, if it's something you look for. And in particular, are there specific times when being found online is more important? So post-graduation, when you're job hunting, et cetera. So any of our panelists, feel free to take the lead here.
So I can jump in. So I think that a static online presence is important as a resource so that people who are looking for someone with expertise on a topic or looking for you in particular can easily find you and get a general overview of the types of things that you're available to do. I would say that for most of these sort of static online presences, you want to try to use something that will update without too much input from you. So Google Scholar is definitely an important thing to have. Maybe something like ResearchGate, things like that, where they'll sort of update as your papers come out or something like that. You also, I think, want a static online presence that will help people figure out how to contact you. So a personal web page should have, information on how to contact you, or a contact form if you're worried about getting just a lot of spam email. And then a little bit about why people might want to contact you. And it can be a good place also for sharing resources like slide decks that you're interested, or code that you're interested in distributing. I think in terms of when times that it's important, I think it's definitely really important if you're job hunting, then you definitely want a place where people can look you up. But a lot of the things that we do in academia and especially sort of require people evaluating you. So, you know, if you're submitting a grant or something, people might be interested in Googling you to see, is this really something that you have expertise in? So I think there are times it's more important, but I don't think there are really times when it's not important.
Oh, so I'm just going to add a little bit more. I agree completely with everything that Ellie has said, that it's important to show what kind of research skills you have or what are the topics you're interested in, and just give like a general idea of who you are. So when, for instance, my current position at Urban Institute, because it's a very much a public policy research institution, and they're very focused on looking at outwards. So actually when I applied, they had fields where they asked, what was my Twitter account? Do I have a personal website? Do I have a LinkedIn account? And so the fact that they had a specific field, it wasn't required, but the fact they had those fields shows how important it is for them to have people who are ongoing, like have this like social media presence, because we need to be able to like not just communicate with those policymakers, but the people themselves too, who are trying to help with the programs that we are developing. So
yeah, I agree with everything that Claire and Ellie have said so far. I also I like the quote, I web, therefore I am, you know, so it's today, to sort of be, you know, a legitimate candidate for a job or anything like that, you do have to have a good LinkedIn profile. You know, it just helps to lend your application some more weight, I think, especially for job seeking.
How do you balance the multiple types of profiles there are, right? So your institution probably has a profile with your page. You could have a LinkedIn page, a ResearchGate page, a Google Scholar page, and a personal website. Do you feel that all of them are a requirement, or you could choose one in lieu of the others, or do they serve totally different purposes?
I think the different sites serve very different purposes. So I think as many as possible that you can manage reasonably is a good thing to have. I think you don't necessarily need to update them all continuously, but whenever you have one that can update itself, that's I think a much better one to choose than one that you'll have to update. A lot of the sort of more academic ones, you can link to your ORCID, and then that updates, and then it pushes updates out. So that's another way that you can kind of sort of only have to update one page. But I think, yeah, there are different, like the people that are on LinkedIn is a very different audience than the people that are on ResearchGate or that are checking your institutional webpage. So I think that it's useful to have a presence everywhere, but you don't have to be as active everywhere. I think it's just, you know, the point is that you want to think about who do you want to find you, and where might they be looking.
This is Sam. I would agree with that. I think it depends on the context and the job that you're in. Like if you're in academia, maybe you want to spend a little on your you know, on your Google Scholar or, you know, academia dot whatever profiles. But I'm not in academia anymore, and so I spend more time on my own personal website. I've been spending a little more time on my LinkedIn profile, but again, it just depends, I think, on the context of what you want to do with your career and who's going to be looking at what thing to look for information on you. So I think it depends.
My impression is that LinkedIn is more for industry than for academia. Is that right?
That's
so
Yeah.
that's what I would say.
So just again echoing what Ellie and Sam has said, I do think that you should try to optimize what social platforms, and to answer the question of whether or not LinkedIn's more for industry. I do agree with that. So my specialty being data privacy, I got contacted a lot actually by recruiters from industry through my LinkedIn. So actually recently happened that I got contacted from Amazon because they were trying to start a new data privacy group. And so I keep my LinkedIn updated just as one of the additional social platforms, even though I'm not actively looking for a job. I really enjoy my current job, but you never know what will pop up. So
Yeah, I'd
Do you,
also say, sort of tying it a little bit to the current situation, I think that by having kind of a broad set of places where contact information and expertise is available, this can help when, like news media is looking for someone to talk to about COVID, for example,
Mhm.
then they may be looking in different places than you would have normally thought to have people look for you, because if you were thinking about jobs or academics, et cetera, as your audience, and then something crops up where actually the media is the audience that you want to attract. If you've got kind of a little bit of information everywhere, then that helps people to find you in situations like this.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So it sounds like kind of the gist is to cover your bases, and different people will look for you in different places. And as much as these static kind of resources can be automated, like Google Scholar automatically pulling your publications, for example, the more automation, the better. So it's less of a burden to go in and update. We touched a little bit on this. I want to talk about personal websites. So we talked about institutional websites, but I also want to talk specifically about tools for creating a personal website and how often you update and how much traffic you get. And just to highlight, I pulled a couple of screenshots from Claire's and then from Sam's personal websites. I think that they used different platforms to make them. And so this is the homepage of Claire's website. The URL is her name, so it'll come up in Google fairly easily. The headers across the top are home, about me, CV, research, talks, teaching, outreach, advice. So there's a lot of content here. And then if you go, for example, to the research page, there's a page on data privacy, and Claire talks about kind of why she does what she does and why it's important. So I think to Ellie's point, like someone looking for a data privacy person might come across this and know that this is Claire's expertise. And then Sam's website highlights her degree and her current position, and then all things R and a book and R packages, etc. So specifically for Claire and Sam, do you want to talk a bit about the tools that you used and how often you update your website, and how automated this process is?
So I'm going to start off by telling people when I made my personal website, I already knew how to do HTML, CSS, Bootstrap, and all those. So mine, because I wanted more higher like customability or customization. There you go. That's where I can talk. I use a hosting service called Bluehost. This is not something I recommend for everybody, especially when you're starting, because again, I already knew how to hard code everything. So if you actually go to my website, it's a little bit more interactive and dynamic, and that's because I had to code that myself. So that's my preface here, or my warning to people. To recommend what people should try, I would look at, there's a lot of free services that you could first start to see if it's something you can maintain yourself. So there's like WordPress that you can join in jointly with GoDaddy. I've heard of, so that's the one I personally have used with, and it seems to work pretty well. It's just, for me, it's more frustrating because I can customize more things that I want to do. So I don't use it, but something else I have done. Know that you can use Google Sites. People have used that. Or I think with Sam's, hers is through GitHub. So that one, it seems like a lot of people have their personal sites through that, and it seems to work out really well. So I guess that was my first one, was my caveat. Second was like what I think people will want to use. And then going into why do I maintain my personal website and what I think is beneficial with it. So I have it on my signature all the time. It's kind of like my indirect way of people when I email them, or if other people are trying to find me, it'll pop up. And I've been told multiple times through email exchanges, people are like, oh, that's really cool that you researched this area. I looked on your website. Or just because I recently started this position at Urban Institute last December, when I was job interviewing, people went on my page and they looked on my about page, which shows me a picture of doing triathlons. And so these people talk to me about that, like, oh, that's really cool, you do triathlons. And one of the people who was like head of the search committee said that he was really impressed that I did an Ironman, which is not something I talked about, but it's on my website, right? So it's just like these added little things that shows like my personality, I guess, and that people like can relate and have a good additional talking points during the job interviews. So how often do I update it? I update it so it depends on the page. Some of them I don't update as often. Some others I do. So like my CV page is actually propagated through my Google Drive. So it's an embedded PDF that's on the page, and then you can scroll through on that embedded PDF. So for talks, I update every time I have a talk coming up, and there's a outreach page that I'll update once a month or whenever I have an outreach. So I do this, my website, I update far more often than a lot of my other social media platforms, but that's because I personally like maintaining it myself. So does it get a lot of traffic? And if I track this, yes, I totally track this. I get a lot of hits. So you try to track unique hits though. So because people might go through your page and it might repeat the hits. So I think when I got my update for this last week, I had over 50 unique hits. So that's seems to be average. My advice page for the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship, because I give advice on that one during peak application time when people are looking, gets over 1,000 hits a week.
Wow.
So it's, yes, I track these things and it does get my name out there. So now I'm talking way too long, sorry. On to Sam.
What do you use to track? Do you use Google Analytics or something else?
So I use a different program that's kind of archaic, but it still runs and it still gives me email pop-ups. It's like Stat Counter or something like that. So that's what Google Analytics has to be synced with, like I think with Google Sites and something else. So I haven't bothered to try to see how it interfaces with my Bluehost. So.
Okay. Sam, do you want to talk a bit about your website? And I also wanted to highlight, so I have a screenshot of your resume as well, because I think it's a beautiful example of kind of a digital resume online, if you want to touch on this too.
Yeah, sure. So my website is hosted through GitHub. I created it back in, I think, 2015, 2016-ish. So it's in the Jekyll, it's run by Jekyll. I don't really understand the back end of it, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm in the process of switching everything over to Blogdown because I created it before Blogdown was a thing. And I much prefer the look and feel of those websites to the Jekyll website that I have now, but it's taking a while. And so I update my website every time I have a new blog post, or I have something on my CV and I update something else on my CV. Every time I go give a talk somewhere, I put some slides up in the blog, things like that. Yeah, I just update it through, I use RStudio. And so I just write a blog post in R Markdown, and then it gets, compiled, and I push it to GitHub Pages. And then it, is up there. And I have no idea how much traffic it gets. I don't track it at all. I probably could, but it's just, one more thing that I don't really have time for. So yeah.
When you write blog posts, do you find that they're useful in terms of kind of demonstrating your expertise and talking about a talk that you give, or do you find that people interact and it fosters discussion with other people you wouldn't normally have spoken to about that?
Normally when I write a blog post, so I don't have a way to comment on my blog post. So normally what I'll do is I'll put up the blog post, and then I'll send out a tweet, and then people will, comment on the tweet or retweet it or whatever. And so that's been fun, but mostly it's just like I have some thoughts that I think are interesting and I want to save them for myself somewhere. And so I put up a blog post, and then maybe somebody else is interested in it, and so I tweet about it. I don't really, it's just mostly a place for me to collect interesting thoughts, I would say.
I think that could be useful, especially just for you to go back to. And it sounds too like it's kind of a multi-modality situation where you're blogging in one location, and then you're tweeting about it and maybe interacting with people in another.
And as for my CV, I did that with the page down package in R. There's nothing particularly special about the layout that I have there. It's just sort of the default template that comes with the page down package, but it was really fun, and I really like having a really slick looking CV, and it got a lot of attention when I first tweeted it out, so that was fun. But I really like it. I just think it looks cool, and I like all the little icons and stuff.
It's definitely fun. Next up, we have social media, unless we have more thoughts on websites and more static forms.
So I might just say why I don't really have a personal website. So I have a lab website on BU, and I had, when I was a postdoc and a grad student, I had a web page on the Harvard system, which are sort of a little bit like a hybrid between a personal web page and an institutional web page because I had to create them. But for me, I found that like maintaining those was just too much work. And so from a web page, really all I want is something that's either static or will update itself. And so that's, for me, it didn't really seem worth it to have that extra piece, so I like focus most of my stuff. Most of my sort of ongoing things are focused on Twitter and using that as a way to draw people in, and then that links out to my website if they need some particular resource. But yeah, I ended up not having a personal website just because it seemed like a lot of work.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think when I was putting together some slides for this, I was thinking of it as static, but as both Claire and Sam were talking, it sounds like there was kind of a lot of work up front, and then it's actually not that static. So every time you're giving a talk or you're thinking of something new and you want to share some thoughts, you're going in and updating that webpage. So I think that's definitely a fair point, that it may not be so static and it may require some ongoing labor. Okay, so next up, can everyone still see my slides? The little indication that they're sharing went away. Okay. So next up, we have social media, and what I was originally thinking of is your more dynamic online presence. So talking about which platforms to use and when. I think with respect to social media, there are an overwhelming number of platforms, and how to engage with others and how to find others and in what ways you might engage. So for all panelists, the first set of questions is related to which platforms you're active on. It sounds like Twitter is a popular one, and maybe there are benefits and drawbacks, or kind of a time and a place for each. And then which communities you engage in, and whether or not you have separate personal and professional accounts. So whoever would like to start.
So for me, I mostly engage on Twitter. And that's, I think, I have basically some content on a lot of these other platforms, but, and even I've started doing some TikTok stuff, but the goal is, I don't think you can really be sort of active and on multiple platforms, but sometimes the different platforms are like a better way of sharing information. So for example, if I want to talk about something in a little bit more longer form, then I write a Medium post, but then I share that post to Twitter. And the main goal is to get my Twitter audience to have access to that other information. Or when I make a TikTok video, then I post that on Twitter. Or the same with YouTube, and LinkedIn has like this slide share thing. So I post my slides there again, but the goal is not to necessarily engage with all of those audiences, because I think each of the platforms has very distinct audience. And so once you've found the audience that you want, you can, I think, use the other platforms as a way of sort of a good way of like making the content that they're best for, but you want to kind of pick one that is your main one that you're going to focus on, I think. And I don't have a separate professional or personal Twitter account. I basically just do everything on Twitter. When I started, my early followers were like my mom and my PhD advisor, and I felt like that gave me a good sort of boundary on like what are the limits of like personal and professional stuff to share. If I don't want both of them to see it, then it's like probably not appropriate. And yeah, I've sort of kept that boundary as I've gone forward.
Sam, I thought you were going to talk. I don't want to interrupt you.
Twitter's like me and my like sorority sisters from college and my siblings. So, and all of my other social media profiles, like, Facebook and Instagram that I have for personal use, I keep pretty locked down. So just if you're searching for me, the thing you see is my public Twitter. And I do engage on LinkedIn a little bit. Like if I have a blog post, sometimes I'll put it up on LinkedIn. And I also engage on GitHub quite a bit. I kind of treat that as a social media platform, even though it's more of like a coding thing, because you can comment and you can follow people and things like that. So Twitter I really like because there's a lot of users. There's a good community for the R community. There's dedicated hashtags like rstats or academic Twitter. The cons of Twitter, I think, are that it can be a little trolly, and the people sometimes are less polite, which could be the character limit or it could be the people. And then GitHub, I think the pros are that you can easily share your code. Sometimes I'll post a GitHub gist or something, showing some code, posting issues on R packages, contributing to R packages. And the con of GitHub is that it's mostly a one-way communication and it's not as interactive as something like Twitter. But yeah, so just again, as far as the, professional versus personal, I do have all of the, all my personal social media, but then mainly the professional ones are, for interacting with other professionals. And also now that I work for the government, I can only say so much on my public social media stuff. So I sort of keep it very, very professional.
Hi. So I also use Twitter. I don't have as great of a following as Ellie and Sam because I kind of was just trying to figure out Twitter, and then I got more active around like a couple of years ago. I made it in 2015, I think, or something like that, but I didn't start really actively using it until like last year or the year before that. So I don't have a separate Twitter account personally. I did the same thing as Ellie did, which was I make it very professional. I think the most personal I get is I will tweet about my beagle because he's cute, but that's pretty much it. And in terms of the other platforms, the same thing as what Ellie and Sam has said, which is I have a presence on each of them pretty much, but the extent is different. Like for instance, Facebook, I treat that I have all my posts on there is all just with friends, except for a couple that I'll make it more public because people will still search for you. Like employers will look on the internet and find out what is your Facebook account and Twitter and things like that. So I have a few things I'll make public that I feel are very safe. But for me, Facebook is mostly for family. So I keep that very personal and separate versus like LinkedIn. I do maintain my LinkedIn account because I'm more in industry. And I will do the same thing as Sam, which is if I make a blog post, I'll put it on there. But I'm not as active on that as like I've seen other people. So I think because I put most of my energy towards my personal website and Twitter, I don't really get as much into the other social platforms. I guess to reinforce what we've already kind of heard is that there's a big presence on Twitter. And that's partially why I got on there. It's just that it's just such a big, our community, our ladies, statistics, because my field is cross between computer science, there's a huge computer science presence there as well. So that's why I focus a lot of my energy on that versus, let's say for Instagram, I don't see it as a big of a presence there in these scientific areas. But since I mentioned before, I'm on a triathlete. Triathletes are really big on Instagram, so I have one so I can follow some of the triathletes I like and get tips on better ways to run or bike and things. So that's like completely separate. So I think you just need to figure out where are the communities that you want to target and be on those social platforms.
I want to ask a follow-up question about Twitter, since it sounds like that's the most popular option of the three. And something that Sam mentioned was that one of the downsides is that there are a lot of kind of internet trolls or people who aren't as polite. So I'm curious how you handle that, if you see it as something like that's just always going to be there and you ignore it, or you try to address it and make amends with whoever is leaving a less than polite comment.
I think so. In my experience, there's kind of several different types of ways in which people can be kind of unpleasant. And one is just the fact that this is text only and you only have 280 characters. And that can make something that is really not intended to be unpleasant come across as terse or severe. And so one of the things I try to do is just give people the benefit of the doubt. If something comes across as harsh, I just try to say, what if they didn't mean it that way, and respond back politely or pleasantly. And a lot of the time that's enough because they didn't mean it to come across harsh. They were just constrained by the Twitter account characters, and we can kind of proceed with the discussion. The next possibility is that there are people who really do disagree and they are angry, but they're reachable. And so those people sometimes, again, if you just sort of engage with them and say, well, look, I'm sorry that, you're angry about this. Like, the reason I posted it is because I'm angry about it too. And is this like a bad thing that shouldn't be happening? And here's like my argument. A lot of times that either they just sort of, okay, they don't want to get into an actual discussion and they leave, or you can change their mind. And then the third type is the people who are really trolls, and they're, they have their message, they want to get out, they don't care what you're saying, and really their goal is to get you to interact with them in order to like benefit off your clout. So if you have more followers than them and you interact with them, then their thing will get, their tweet, their profile, etc., gets pushed out to more people. And so for those people, really the best thing to do is just completely ignore them. If it's really mean or nasty, you can hide the reply, you can block them. A lot of times I don't even do that, because sometimes when you block people, that kind of gives them a little bit, if they're really like trying to target you specifically, that gives them like a little bit of ammunition to be like, oh, look, she blocked me, like, and sort of start a campaign against you or something. So a lot of the times with those people, I just completely ignore them, because what they want is interaction. And, if they're not even trying to learn something or be pleasant, then why should I give them that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Especially about the part where if they don't have very many followers, just don't engage with them at all. At this point, I have a couple thousand Twitter followers, and if somebody with 100 followers is in my mentions trying to say something, which almost never happens, I just totally ignore it. And the mute button is there, mute often and mute early. I do that a lot. Or the soft block is also an option, where you block someone and then instantly unblock them, but then that forces them to stop following you. But yeah, usually when I can think of one instance where I had a really popular Twitter thread going around, and there was one particular tweet in the thread that got a particularly strong negative response from somebody. And I had a bunch of people in my mentions being like, no, it's clearly this, like, she didn't mean that. Like, and so a lot of times, people like my other followers or other people in the thread will come in and say, hey, no, this is what it is, and then I'll say, yes, that is what it is. Thanks for pointing that out, and then I'll get out again, just to have a clear point. But yeah, there's mansplainers too, but like I said, mute early, mute often, put your degree in your name. That's what, once I put doctor in my name on Twitter, I got a lot less of that. So
Interesting.
I'm just going to make a quick comment on what Sam said about putting the doctor. Like, I put PhD on my signature for my emails, because that was some early advice I received, was once you have your PhD, put that on your signature, because the default bias is that people will assume that women don't have a PhD instead of men. Mm-hmm. And so if you're in any kind of research capacity, it's a detriment if people just automatically assume that you don't have one. So
yeah, I actually I added that to my signature, and I also I added to my pronouns, so it says she, her, doctor, so that people know that if they're referring to me in like the third person, that it should be doctor in like an article, professional setting, which was that's not my idea. I stole the idea from somebody who I thought it was a good way to kind of get it in there. And just going back, one other thing I thought of in terms of interacting with people is that one thing to remember is that when people quote tweet your tweets, your followers don't see those until you interact with them. So if there's somebody who's like quote tweeting you in a nasty way, like, just, don't, block them and ignore them, because the people that you're interacting with normally are not seeing that until you interact with it. And so you don't want to bring that to the attention of people that otherwise wouldn't see it. Whereas if someone replies to you, your followers might see that if they're scrolling down the chain. And so those ones you might want to think about hiding that, or if you really feel like it needs clarification or something. But I agree with Sam. A lot of times if there's something that, you know, someone's misunderstanding something, a lot of times my followers just like get in there and argue with them. So I don't even have to do it myself.
Awesome. I think those are some good tips, especially mute early and often, and the soft block was something that I had not heard of before. So next up we have generating content and how to participate on these platforms. And I want to be sure to have time for audience Q&A. So we're at about 12:40, so maybe another 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll switch over and take questions from the audience. So in terms of engaging, there's kind of this pyramid, right? Anybody can log in and create an account and observe what others have written. You can share what others have written on most of these platforms, or you can share and add your own insights. And I want to talk about crafting your own post. So once you get on social media and you're feeling comfortable and you're starting to kind of create content, what that content might look like. And I want to start with tutorials. So I think these are such a fun way of communicating really complicated topics. And so this is a screenshot of one of Ellie's tweets that says, "Grant me the serenity to ignore the misconceptions I can't change, the courage to tutorial the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference." So a couple of questions specifically for Ellie and Sam and Claire too, if you have thoughts on tutorials. But I want to talk about kind of the core components and how to pick a topic, and then tips for communicating really complicated scientific content in 280 character sound bites. And just as an example for someone who hasn't seen a tutorial before, so this is one that Ellie posted fairly recently. And it's talking about causal inference and mediation mechanisms, but there's a picture of Baby Yoda. And if you scroll through the tutorial, there are all these fun GIFs and ways to make information accessible that I think is unique to Twitter that's not really on the other platforms. So I want to spend a bit of time talking about this.
Yeah, so I think in terms of picking a topic, one of the things I try to do with content that I'm creating on Twitter, or if I'm doing a Medium article or anything like this, is to never create content I'm only going to use once. So a lot of my tutorials started off as, you know, explainers of papers that I just published, or they might be misconceptions that I run into while teaching students on some topic, or if I'm writing a paper and there's something where I ended up having to go and read a bunch of other articles to resolve a question for this paper I'm writing, then I might do a tutorial on that. And so for me, I think picking a topic is both about you know, something that might be interesting to other people, but also something that I already am having to think or write or teach about. And that way, the tutorial itself can actually help me kind of frame what are the key aspects of this topic, what are the key points that would need to be made in a talk or something like that. And so it kind of serves multiple purposes. And I think that's useful because, you know, tutorials aren't like something you're adding to your CV. So if there's a way that you can kind of double up that content for other things, I think that's really useful. In terms of the core components, I think you really want the first tweet of the tutorial to capture people's attention. You want to explain to them like that this is a tutorial, what the topic is, and why they should care. And then, you know, if your goal is going to be to make it fun, then you want some kind of fun GIF or image or something that will lure them in. And will get people to like or share it. So, you know, there are lots of potential images I could have used for that first one, but everybody loves Baby Yoda. So having Baby Yoda there maybe potentially increases the number of people that like interact with that tweet, and that can kind of help it spread. So you can be a little bit strategic like that. But the thing I really like about the ability to add GIFs is that it is really hard to fit this complicated information in 280 characters. And I think it's really, really important for a tutorial that each tweet contain a single idea, that it be able to stand alone. You don't want an idea to run across 2 tweets, because then if somebody wants to retweet specifically that idea, they won't be able to do it just by retweeting that one tweet. So I always try for the tutorial is every tweet has a separate idea. You know, I may start, that may mean that it's like, okay, this tweet says there are 3 basic things you need to know, A, B, C, and then the next tweet is like about thing A, the next tweet is about thing B, but that's sort of separate ideas. But then where the GIFs come in is that, you know, sort of the idea like a picture is worth 1,000 words. You can kind of give people a little bit of an extra intuition by picking the right GIF. So, you know, if you want to say like, you know, heads up, the next 5 GIFs are going to be really confusing, or sorry, the next 5 tweets are going to be really like difficult and we're going to really dive into something complicated. You can convey that with a GIF where you don't have to waste the characters. You can just instead have someone like scratching their head, or, you know, like a meme with all like the equations or whatever. And so I think having GIFs is like an easy way to kind of give some, sort of tell people how to, a little bit how to feel about the information, that gives you some extra space beyond the 280 characters. Sometimes I think if you've got a long thread, if it's just text, people are going to get really bored reading it. And so I think it's usually good. You want to break up at least some GIFs or pictures. It can also be useful to do polls. Sometimes I'll draw cartoons that I put in there, so it'd be just a static image instead of a GIF. But I think, you know, usually I try to have at least every other tweet in a tutorial thread has some kind of extra content, a quote tweet, a poll, a GIF, a picture, because I think that sort of helps get around the 280 character limit if you have that. One of the things to consider, though, is that doing that does potentially reduce the accessibility of the tweet, because a screen reader might not be able to share that information that's in that GIF or that image. And I have tried in the past using like the accessibility options, but I found that when you make a thread, like I usually do all my threads as a draft and then publish them all at once so that people aren't waiting for the next tweet. But when you do that with the accessibility reader, sometimes it's not compatible and it kind of crashes the thing, and then you might lose your tutorial. So I actually kind of have given up on that a little bit. And so that's something I wish Twitter would figure out a fix for. But that is something that's worth thinking about if your audience, if you're concerned about accessibility issues, then the GIFs and the images are not really good for that.
Definitely. That's a good summary of kind of how to start with a tutorial if it's not something that you've done before. Claire and Sam, do you have thoughts on tutorials? Have you made them, engaged with them? And then we'll move to the audience Q&A.
I don't think I've ever done a tutorial or really even seen a tutorial before, but this is really exciting. I'm excited to try it out.
Yeah, I personally haven't done a tutorial. I mean, I've tweeted talks as they've been given, but I do think so I 100% agree with something that Ellie has said that I think applies to a lot of things, which is don't try to create new content, try to double dip if you can. And this goes into what I've heard from a colleague of mine saying that if you want to optimize your opportunity, it's easier when you have stuff. So once the more stuff you have that you could repurpose for a lot of things, when an opportunity arises, you can be more spontaneous to do them. And so this, like, his context was on applying for proposals or even giving talks, when like I randomly asked him, hey, can you be part of this session for JSM? And he's like, I given a talk on that. Yeah, I could totally do this. Like, and it wasn't an extra burden for him because he's like, oh, I already given a version of this talk. I could just shorten it up a little bit more and I already have an abstract. So yeah, just like, again, reiterating what Ellie said, is that don't make it new unless you know that you're going to use it again.
Yeah, I think that's a great piece of advice. We can skip to the audience Q&A, and I have some backup questions if we need them, but we can try to use the raise hand feature in Zoom. I have not used it before, so we can see how it goes. Otherwise, I think we're a small enough group. If someone has a question, we can just go to unmuting yourself and you can ask the question. Okay. Michaela, it looks like you are raising your hand. I think I unmuted you.
Yes.
Fabulous.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My question, so for background, I'm currently a PhD student in statistics, and I find myself like, I see that people are doing blogs and I see that people are tweeting a lot, but I am at this point, maybe because of imposter syndrome, not super comfortable with putting maybe my thoughts out there in those kinds of formats, because I struggle with the fact that maybe what I have to say isn't actually anything different than what someone else would say, or isn't actually really that helpful to people. So I guess I was wondering how you would all recommend sort of maybe either getting past that mindset, or like what could be some good like first topics to be either blogging or tweeting about to get started.
So I would like to answer this question just because I didn't start tweeting until more recently, and I feel a little bit imposter syndrome already being next to Sam and Ellie, who has like thousands of followers. I have a few hundred now, and I'm like, yeah, go me. When I first started my Twitter account, I started just retweeting things because like things that are like, oh, that's cool, I retweet them, and I just kind of focused on within my field. So I focused on data privacy, statistics, and then I decided like women in science because that's something I'm really passionate about. And so that's what I first started doing. And then I kind of moved over into like when I was more comfortable with saying like, oh, this is really awesome. And that's all I say, or something like that. That like somebody won an award, or there's like cool resource, things like that. I guess this I'm just trying to explain like just baby steps, at least for me, helped just what I thought was safe. And then I got a little bit more courage. Like I think I didn't start actually saying more affirmative things about my field on Twitter until like this last year, where I was said like, there's this paper, check it out, I think it's good. Or this somebody retweeted a paper. I was like, I have issues with this part. I was still trying to be as tactful as possible with the 280 characters on that one, because I didn't want people to misinterpret that. So that's how I handled it, was just like these are the things I'm okay with retweeting, and then maybe saying like awesome warm fuzzy things, maybe little emojis that like people think are cool or whatever, and then moving on to more of the other content. And I mentioned like, oh yeah, I tweeted about my blog. I've made one blog post. I'm super proud of that blog post. And this happened earlier this month. So it takes baby steps, and then yeah. So
Yeah, I definitely think baby steps is the way to go. That's what I did too. I think the other thing to remember is that even though there is like a big academic community on Twitter, a lot of them are also students, and there's also like general public. There's high school students, there's college undergrads. And so, you know, even if you're like, well, I think maybe I feel comfortable, I could make a tutorial about a t-test. That's probably content that a lot of people would be interested in. Actually, the simpler the content is, the potential more people there are that are interested in that. So I think, you know, even if something is like simple and people more senior than you will obviously know it, that doesn't mean that they're going to be tweeting about that. And so I think you can sort of find what you're comfortable with talking about and talk about that. And it doesn't have to be something that's unique that only you can talk about. It just has to be something that you want to talk about.
Yeah, just really quick, I totally agree with everything that Ellie and Claire said. And also I dropped in the chat a link to an RStudio conference talk by David Robinson called The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Public Work. And I thought that that was a really interesting talk. And so since I saw that talk, I have just been putting everything out that I can, you know, that I feel is a good representation of me as a researcher, as a professional, whatever. Just put something out there. That way, you know, you have the experience, and then your future self will thank you because you have proof of all this other work that you've done.
Thank you.
Great. So we have 2 more questions. We'll start with Marianne, and then we'll go to Tawny. So I will unmute Marianne.
Just a quick question. Do you have any experience with Reddit or with podcasts?
So I have a podcast. We've got, I think, about 10 episodes. We just started it this fall. And I think that's been a really fun thing to do. We have guests on, and then we talk a little bit about various topics. And the goal of our podcast is to sort of keep things casual. So we have a buzzer that if somebody says something with jargon, we buzz them and they have to explain it simply. Reddit, I have not really interacted on, but I think that there is like a pretty active community on Reddit. So I think if that's the audience that you're interested in, then I think it's worth trying. One of the
And
things about podcasts is you don't really get much feedback.
how long are your podcasts?
Each episode is about an hour.
Okay, yeah, I've seen podcasts that long, and I can't think longer than 10 minutes.
Yeah,
Even
so
if it's
we break
interesting.
it. Yeah, I mean, we break it up into segments, and we don't record it all at once. So, but it is a lot of work to get a podcast out. Ours comes out every 2 weeks, and it is kind of a lot of work.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Claire and Sam, anything to add before we go to the next question?
Reddit is not a nice place.
That is true. That is very true.
So I would tread very carefully.
Okay. Tawny, I'm going to unmute you and you're the next question.
Can the speakers touch a little bit upon balancing managing these social media accounts so they don't overwhelm your life? Like finding balance in maintaining them, but also not becoming consumed by them.
I don't know that I've done a great job of that. um, I do try to use Twitter in like, I guess what I sort of think of as like dead time, like, if I'm on the train or, sort of like if I'm waiting for a meeting to start or something, then that's like when I'll scroll through. But it is easy for it to kind of take over your life. So I don't know.
Yeah, Twitter's, if you let it, it can take up a lot of your time. But I found that if I try to spend no more than 10 to 15 minutes creating an original tweet, not quote tweeting or retweeting something, then that's a pretty good threshold for me. And I try not to scroll while I'm at work or yeah, and I do it for fun mostly. So I don't think of it as this thing that I have to do to keep up my professional presence. I just think of it as this thing that's fun that I get to do sometimes. And if it's, gets me more followers, it gets me more followers. If not, it doesn't, whatever. It's mostly just a personal fun record keeping tool for me. So
Yeah, I don't know if I'm the best either, especially because I'm so new to Twitter. And we're actually encouraged to work, well, not to tweet all the time, but we're encouraged to like retweet other people's tweets on from work because we do a lot of social outreach, or because we're a social policy and economic policy research center, we try to elevate everybody's blogs and research outcomes and things like that and try to reach the broader public. So we're encouraged to do that, but safely and smartly, of course. As for like trying to maintain, other social media platforms. So for instance, like the website, it takes a lot of time as we've kind of hit on. But for me, the uptake is, or the most of the time is making it, but then once you have it done, then maintaining it is a lot easier. And I try to maintain it. I think I get on it at least once a week, just to kind of evaluate and look back on what I've done and say like, oh, did I give a talk? Like after this, I'll think of like, oh yeah, I did this webinar. I should update my CV, which will update on my website. And then that means like, oh, I need to update my LinkedIn and things like that. And so if you make it more like a weekly thing and like set aside time, like for half an hour, I'm going to update all these things on my CV, my personal website, LinkedIn, and anything else that's connected to that, then it's feels more manageable. At least that's for me. I don't know if that's the work for everybody, but
Okay, we're at about 2 minutes to 1 o'clock. I want to thank our audience and our panelists. Panelists, any final thoughts and recommendations before we sign off for today?
I think that my main recommendation is that if this isn't something that you're required to do for your job, then it's something you're doing, as Sam said, for fun. And so you should let that be your guide. If it's not fun, stop, take a break, come back later, or just don't do it at all. Like, this is a good way to connect with other people in our communities, stats, epi, computer science, etc. And it's a good way to kind of get yourself and your work known and out there. But it's not the only way to do those things. There were ways to do that before Twitter and places like that. So yeah, I think, if you're finding that it's difficult or uncomfortable, like, then just don't do it.
I will say, in addition to what Ellie just said, that people are going to Google you. So having at least something, if it is just a LinkedIn or having a cleaner Facebook or things like that, that just makes it easier for people to find you. I think at the bare minimum, especially if you're a researcher, you should have a Google Scholar, because that's an easy way, and it's very static. It's very easy to maintain. You just put in your picture, say what are the key things you like, and then Scholar is magical and it will find your name, and it will even be like, I'm confused, is this paper actually yours? Like, and you say like yes or no, and that's it. Like, it's pretty straightforward, because you have to imagine, as if you were on the committee, what is the first thing you're going to do? You're going to Google that person's name and look them up. So just kind of make it easy for people to find stuff. And so that way they don't have to dig down a rabbit hole and maybe find something embarrassing or not something very good about yourself. Sam lost internet for a bit.
It looks like she's back in. Sam, if you can hear us, do you have any final comments or recommendations? She may not be able to hear us. Okay. So we're at 1 o'clock. Again, I just want to thank everyone for participating. And if you have any ideas for future Caucus for Women in Statistics Lunch and Learns, definitely reach out and let us know. And thank you again to our panel. Have a good rest of your day, everybody.